Welcome to the Pantheon Plus Rewind.
Hello, good friends, and welcome to episode 85 of The Rewind, the weekly podcast that dedicates itself to the upcoming MMORPG Pantheon Rise of the Fallen and its beloved community. This week was a dev stream week, so you can expect that this show is going to be big. Beyond that, we've got some fun Pantheon Plus activities, one of Kilsin's infamous either-or threads, some community shoutouts, and lastly, a return to the earliest days of Terminus through the recently republished lore. So, jump aboard with me, Desrin, and my lore-exploring co-host, Theric, as we head full steam into 2022. Thank you for riding with us, and we hope you'll enjoy this week's Rewind. Alright, dude. This year is already firing on like all three cylinders for me, and I don't even really know why. I was talking to you about this a little bit last week, I think, but I just feel like totally like reinvigorated, you know?
That's awesome.
Yeah, it feels good. I'm just like, I'm just really filled with this kind of like strong desire to just, try new things, be creative, which, maybe that comes often for some people, but it really feels special for me. So I'm going to try to ride this, but it's really too bad because my body has recently decided that 2 a.m. is the proper time to wake up for at least the last week. And being in the Plus Guild, I think most folks in the guild are pretty familiar with my sleeping problems, but dang, man, it's been especially rough lately.
Yeah, you know what? I go through that too a little bit. Sometimes it's like physical and mental. Like I'm up mentally and then I'm down physically, or I'm up physically and down mentally. I find that like what you were saying earlier about just feeling energized and creative. Like I don't take that for granted anymore. I think I used to take that for granted, and I would just sort of like, be like, oh, good, I feel great. But now when I feel that way, I'm like, I try to be productive.
You have to get it done. Yeah.
You got to strike while the iron's hot, right? Or else it just fades away, and then you're like, oh, yeah, it's gone, right? That creative, that sort of, your muse is no longer speaking to you. And yeah, as for the sleeping thing, I don't know. I've been sleeping really well lately, which is not something, I know, I don't mean to tease you with it, but I've been sleeping really well lately, and not to jinx it for me, because that's not always been the case, but it's been pretty good
awesome.
lately. Yeah,
that's awesome. It's something to appreciate, but
it really is. If you don't sleep well, you don't really, you can't do much else. So
yeah, and like that's kind of where I'm at. I'm at this like weird like conflict between feeling really inspired, but also like just absolutely dog tired. But
take what you can get.
and I think it's probably going to be a big show today, right? So enough like kind of going on about like whatever you'd call this, like our bodies fight against itself and probably growing old. I don't want to say that, but
hey, that's the reality of the situation. We are growing old, so we waste time by lamenting our old age and not enjoying what we enjoy. So yeah, let's get to it.
But hey, you know what we do enjoy? That's right. Nice. Our adventuring party.
Smooth.
I try, man. I try. And so this week we've got Daimlos on the Darkmer Cleric, Shuriken on the Dwarf Cleric, Jason on the Scar Beard Lord, Ziplocs on the Darkmer Rogue, Sparrow on the Elf Ranger, Bounty Code on the Human Wizard, Screech on the Scar Bard, and Lucille on the Gnome Enchanter. So, awesome. Thank you so much, as always, guys. And if you want to jump in on being part of the adventuring party, you could drop a donation in the YouTube premiere if you make it, or if you like to support the show elsewhere, we do have a Patreon as well. And that, I think, is the short spiel. So it's a big show, so let's get going to the VR news and notes.
This week in Visionary Realms news and notes. Okay, so it's a developer update stream week, which we know always provides lots of news and notes to talk about. So let's go over some of the highlights from them. So this one was a little bit more general in nature, covering, a few areas rather than drilling down too deeply into one area of development specifically. The one thing that was talked about probably the most extensively, I want to say, and we maybe saw the most of from a visual standpoint, was something they were calling the material library that they now have. And this was shown through numerous items, a video sort of going over numerous item textures, which ranged from like rusted iron to more mythical substances like cold dark steel and some other undisclosed materials, which they didn't want to give away because for lore reasons, but more on that later. But Joppa talked a little bit about how Philip Kedge, who we've talked about a few times here, their newly hired technical artist, has set up the library in a way that these can basically be applied across the world so that all the materials in the world have a really consistent look to them. There was some great looking ones. I mean, even the basic ones, the most mundane material like a rusty iron sword, is going to have the same appearance. And this is, again, my interpretation. We'll see when the time comes. But I think the idea here is that, that rusty iron sword is going to look the same as like a rusty iron door somewhere else. So, when you're out in the world, another example, because this was done in the context of crafting and harvesting as well. So there's, nodes of these materials out in the world. If you come across a cold dark iron node, that anything you craft from that material will have that similar look, which I think is pretty cool. And it's easy to take for granted in a lot of games. Sometimes you're out in the world and, you're harvesting stuff and it doesn't end up looking like that. Like it just doesn't look the same. And the visuals, like I said, were pretty cool. And you're seeing them on the screen if you're watching the video on YouTube here. This kind of consistency really soothes my soul. I particularly like the green one. It brought back all kinds of memories of that shiny, green armor in EverQuest for my ranger. And I would, there's very few things I wouldn't do to get my hands on some of that armor. Des, which one did you like the most? What was your favorite?
Oh man, you stole it. I can't help it, man. Like the green, it got me. It really got me. Not only for the old EQ reference, of course, that's a strong correlation to Brad.
Yes.
And I mean, I just like the texture of it, like specifically, because obviously it's a, new, up to date kind of modern texture versus, so it really seems like the evolution of what was like in our minds. And I love that you said the consistency of tying the resource to the end product to like have that correlation between the world and the armor or the weapon or whatever. That is just so cool. And like that they would think about that is very inspiring.
Well, and like I said, the Cold Dark Steel has a really important lore background too, right? So if you go to Kadasa and you are, hanging around with the dwarves, I would expect you're going to see more of that material in that area because that's foundational it comes from their home planet and that kind of thing. So, and there were some that were like, there was one that actually particular that reminded me of that screen, the video with Ko where that planet is crashing through the atmosphere where they're in the infinite, oh my gosh, Isle of Infinite Storm.
Isle of Infinite Storm, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
and that planet is crashing, planet is crashing through the sky. Sleepless, yes.
Sorry, I had to correct myself because I'm going to flame myself later, so.
Yeah, that's good. You gotta save yourself for future references. But anyways, the texture on one of them looked a lot like that, and I think it was so cool. I mean, I really enjoyed it. So that was one thing. Another item we got to look at was some of the progress with regard to the HDRP conversion that's going on. A couple screenshots showing the world in an updated state with some foliage and that kind of thing. They didn't really focus on that too much. The comment was that the focus is on functionality. So getting this conversion done, making sure it's functional, not really looking at the full beautification, I think, so to speak, right now, just trying to make strides and dial things in with the HDRP conversion. So I'm sure we'll see more of this down the road, especially when that HDRP part 2 stream comes along. So that's exciting because it was just a taste of what I think we're going to see. So that was another thing. We'll get the newsletter next week. And as always, that's going to have the updated roadmap to alpha. But they did give a couple important notes to keep in mind when we see that. And I think these are important because that roadmap, again, is very important for the people who are following this game, and people who aren't following it closely, seeing it new for the first time are like, oh, what's this about? So one of the things they pointed out was that when you see complete on the roadmap, they want to make sure that people understand that that means up to alpha standards. It's complete by alpha standards. It's not the final game. It's not the end of content creation. So like they use traits and dispositions as an example, that system. So when it's complete on the roadmap to alpha, it's ready for alpha, not for game launch, anything like that. And then along the same lines, another clarification was the design complete items. They pointed out that those may be designed complete, but they're awaiting a UI implementation. So when you see gameplay streams like we've seen recently, keep in mind VR still needs to bring in a UI person. They need to get these designed and represented on screen. Now, will it look something like we've seen already up to this point? Maybe, but I think what the message they were trying to get across was, UI again, and we've heard this before, UI is something that comes near the end, right? Like in terms of how things are represented in our user interface, right? So nothing I would expect to see anytime soon, right? You'd agree, Des?
Yeah, I mean, it would be awesome to see that start coming into place, but just going by other, even like beta projects, from the late 2000s, you'll see the UI go through several iterations in a matter of a year or 2 years. In the case of like Vanguard, like I used to have screenshots of like 3 or 4 different versions of that UI, and it's something that can be visually iterated on, but as long as the functionalities there can be hooked up, hopefully it makes whoever comes in to do the job, makes their job a little easier. But not soon.
Yeah, no, exactly. So just a couple notes when you're looking at the roadmap to alpha, if you're new to the project and trying to follow along, what that means, how to interpret it a little bit. So that's good. Now, my personal favorite part of the stream was something that I've been, shouting from the rooftops for quite a while about. The foundational lore for the game, I mean, for where we are, for the world of Terminus, is now back on the website. So if you go to the website, pantheonmmo.com, and click on the drop-down menu on the top left, you'll see World. And now you've got 3 things. You've got the Age of Seclusion, the Age of Chaos, and the Age of something else, which I'm blanking on at the moment because didn't write it down. I know. I'm like, what a shame. Hold on. I'm going to check this on the fly. The Frail Age is the current age. So you can go see all
because Theric hates lore. So like,
yeah, the conspiracy grows. Anyway, they've got that back up on the website, which is awesome. I think it sells the game really well. I think that people read that and they believe, they want to put themselves in this world, so they know they have some grounding to do so. And selling the game is important. It's a crowdfunded game, which, everybody at VR will remind you of, and we will as well. If the game wants to, needs crowdfunding, it needs people to pledge. So go check that out if you don't know the lore. Now, there is one thing I want to point out here, Desmond, and maybe you can help me here, but there used to be a little bit of prehistory in the world history. It was called Before the Ages, where they talked about the dragons. They talked about, before the races came to Terminus. This is conspicuously absent. So what's the deal here? Conspiracy or oversight? What do you think?
I wouldn't say. Ooh. I feel like this isn't mindless. Yeah, I would say conspiracy.
Makes me wonder because maybe there was too much info there in the past. Maybe there was something they wanted to pull it back a little and say, maybe we shouldn't tell the players about this because it's anyway.
So it leaves those that are very studious in lore to have the greatest background of the world.
Yes. Let me be your lore guide, because I've been around for long enough to know the truth, to know the real history. So
that's right.
Yeah. So anyway, that was pretty cool though. I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm just making jokes, but like, I love that it's back on the website. So I'm going to be definitely referencing that quite a bit. We're going to actually talk about it a little later in the show, in the lore segment. But the last thing I'll mention here for VR notes or VR news is the transitioning of the monthly dev streams to short, more focused updates. Minus and Ronik were on the stream this week, and they talked a little bit about, how they want to, dial back the production a little bit to allow more development to happen, because these dev streams, the newsletter, everything like that, specifically talking about the dev streams, I don't want to put words in their mouth. Just, these take a lot of time to produce. And, you think about some of the more recent ones we've seen, there's been a lot of content areas that they've covered, which, it takes effort and time. So with the idea being that this year, and they talked about in the stream, that going heads down, and getting things done, getting as much development done as possible this year. Again, hoping, that word imminent keeps popping up, and imminent to what, but hopefully alpha. This keeps the devs free to do that development rather than doing content production. And, Minus is gonna, put his back into it, I think. And, that can only be a good thing. So I'm happy to see that. And I think you would agree, right?
I mean, to be super clear on this, they're not saying that there's going to be less content. Right. That's kind of the main takeaway I get from this. It's, hey, if we can get away with not doing a full hour dev stream with the creative director that probably has a mountain big enough to put the gate upon, of work to do, the less time that we can grab from him or anyone else that has to be involved but still get the information out there really makes sense. And I think we all want this game to happen as quickly as possible. So now that Minus is there to take care of the content, I feel like it's just a matter of doling out the tasks, right? Just being efficient.
Yeah, delegating is key, right? So yeah, and I know some people really like hearing from Joppa, as do you and I, absolutely. And I'm sure that he'll still make a guest appearance every now and then, but whether this means, that's more time for him to focus on what he's doing and the many hats he wears, that's a good thing by me. So so look for these, look for shorter dev streams in the future, and we'll talk about them. So, Desiree, was there anything else from this dev stream you wanted to touch on, or did I cover the bases?
Oh, that was a great recap, man.
Great, thanks. Okay, so that's what is new with VR. In terms of us here at Pantheon Plus, I can just give you a quick brief thing about what we're doing. We announced a game that we're doing called the Alpha Date Squares. And so it's basically like picking a date on the calendar, on the 2022 calendar, that you think alpha testing may start, and it's going to be a contest. And the way it's going to work is everybody in the community, anybody who wants to participate can. You're going to earn picks doing various things, like, coming on Pantheon Plus You in the green room, or following us, doing some stuff on Twitch, redeeming points on Twitch during our Tuesday night streams, or with some of our streamer friends, commenting on a video, all these kinds of stuff. We're not launching it today. When you're hearing this, it's going to be launched soon. We're going to get the website Pantheon.plus updated as soon as possible, so that the official rules and stuff are there, so everybody can have a chance to participate. But it's going to be for an alpha pledge at the end of the day. We're going to give away a Pathfinder pledge.
Pledge, man. That's so exciting.
Yeah, it seems appropriate, right? Since we're trying to guess alpha date. So, so we will have that up, like I said, ASAP on Pantheon.plus. Stay tuned to our Twitter and Discord if you're not already joined. Then we'll definitely shout it out there. Another thing is I started a new series on YouTube called Lore Exploring, which is going to be basically me playing games and focusing in on lore and story and going through them quickly, as much as, putting it together into I initially said 10-minute video, but they're actually going to be a little longer just because, lore reasons. But the first game is Valley, which is a bit of an older game from 2016, focusing going forward, it's going to be newer releases. I've got a couple games coming out. Well, there's one coming out next month that I want to get covered, and then one the following month that I've already got earmarked. So that's a new exciting series that maybe you can check out. If you like it, let me know. In terms of our Pantheon Plus schedule for this week, we've got our usual midnight stream on Monday with Drac. He's playing EverQuest. Tuesday, we've got our Final Fantasy 14. We're going back to it to stream on Classes 101. Wednesday, we've got our friend Sparrow doing her Twitch stream. She has started streaming, and she's doing Elder Scrolls Online, 9 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. So
I'm actually so hyped for Sparrow streaming, and I've watched her twice now, and it's really chill, good times. You should absolutely jump in. I'm not even joking.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, she, we rated her stream after the dev stream on Thursday last week. And she was.
Yeah, that jump starts it, right?
Yeah. She's a little overwhelmed, but it was fun to see her playing ESO and getting a good crowd going. So, yeah. And then Thursday is the newsletter. Like I said, the Pantheon newsletter. So there will be lots to dig into there. Friday, RedbeardFlynn is doing a new video about Pantheon. So stay tuned for that. Saturday, our friend CryptFox is doing a charity tournament on Twitch. You can find his channel. All these links are in the description. You'll have links to all these folks. So check his stream out on Saturday at 10:30 in the morning. And that's the Pantheon Plus calendar for this week, or for the week coming up, I should say. It's also it for this week's VR News and Notes. When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into the forums and fan projects to see what the discussion's all about.
All right, gotta be honest. Picking a community discussion this week was a bit difficult. I scoured the forums and nothing's really popping out at me. I blame the usual forum posters. Y'all need to step up your game.
Hey, don't say that. Vandred will come out of the woodwork if you do that. I'm just kidding. I love you, Vandred.
Bring it. Yeah, bring it, man. Not saying there was nothing on the forums, just nothing that, really stood out or was, particularly new. So this week, because I knew it was going to be kind of a bigger show with the dev stream and everything, I figured we'll go a little bit more lighthearted. So I decided to just grab good old Kilsin's "What's More Important to You" post.
Yeah, this was a good one. I'm glad you picked this one. I saw it and I was like, yes, I like this post.
Yeah. It definitely can play out really nicely. I'm happy to do it. And this time I was actually sure to grab responses from both the forums and Twitter, so I'm not leaving one platform out. But as usual, when given the choice between two things, a lot of the community chose both. But we'll work with it, right? So the question was, which would you consider, more important, I guess, adventuring or combat, right? So kind of a big place to start. And I was happy to see our wonderful favorite good guy streamer, Co-Carnage, was right there in the Twitter responses. And let me just read his post here. He's going for the adventure. It's when you see the first piece of gear on a high-level player and you decide you just have to get it. Or hear about that big raid you've never seen. The camp at the bottom of the high-level zone you have to try. When you start getting setting the long-term goals. I love that last bit, and that's kind of why I pulled it, was he considers part of the adventure setting the goals. I thought that was kind of special because I never really think of it that way. But, you always have like hopes. And when you have those kind of hopes, it is part of the adventure, right? Like, where am I going? So I love that.
It's funny. I haven't looked at your notes here, but I tried to guess, what his response would be, and it's got to be adventure, right? Just by watching him play. I mean, I don't watch him regularly, but just from
it's definitely not combat. I know.
It's definitely not and not in a negative way. Just in a he's somebody who you can tell gets into the adventure of it, gets into the spirit of it, gets into the
absolutely.
He's in that moment, and the combat stuff, while important. If I had to guess, his would be secondary to him. It's really interesting too. Yeah, like I agree with what he said there, and I think that probably represents a pretty large portion of the community, I would think.
Yeah. And let's swap over to the forums. We've got kind of a fairly new member of the community. We announced the introduction a while back, but this is Big Bad as One on the forums saying, I think combat is a very important role. If you can't kill mobs for the challenge fix, then my adventures aren't complete. Adventure sounds more quest involved, which I rather avoid like the plague.
Wow.
Yeah. He says, I'd rather have more chances at getting into the action to improve my playstyle and finding that shiny piece of desired loot. So very much more about the mechanical, improving yourself kind of a thing, right? Which, I mean, I totally get that. Like, that's a lot of drive of, raiders is like, how good can I be?
Mm-hmm. It's funny because it's such a dichotomy in terms of what people, I mean, there's people who want both, but there is either or people. Think of it like this. Think of a flight simulator, like Flight Simulator, 2021, the one that just came out. Super technical, right? You have to learn. I mean, maybe it's gotten less over the years, but I know back in the day, to play Flight Simulator, you had to actually learn how to fly a plane pretty much. Like you had to really dial into all the, details. But for me, I'm not interested in any of that. I'm interested in flying to cool places and seeing cool things, right? Like,
yeah.
And I think of it kind of the same way with this question. Like, is an MMO a combat simulator for you? Is it a battle simulator that's played out just on a set that you like, or is the combat just something that do along the way of your adventure, right? So Big Bad as One here is really clearly, I spoke too soon in saying that I think most of the community would be about the adventure. That's clearly not what he's saying. He's saying, I love the combat. I'm into the, questing is not my thing, and that's what he wants to avoid. So cool, man. Like, I love the diversity of opinion.
Yeah, actually, I was joking about the community choosing both in spite of Kilsin, asking to choose one. But there was a lot of folks on the combat side, a lot of folks on the adventuring side, and a lot of folks that did the whole, fraction, split it up. But it did turn out to be people on each side pretty steadily. And that's why I was actually pretty happy to choose this, right?
Right. Yeah. It's whenever there's like that sort of split, that means it's a good topic, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's get back to Twitter here with Walking Waste, who says, adventuring is a great part of the MMO experience, but many MMOs miss the mark with this, and so combat will have to win this debate for me personally. Looking forward to both of these spheres of gameplay with Pantheon. So, adventuring is great, but a lot of MMOs screw it up, right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of MMOs screw up combat too, to be honest with you. Like, I would say if I had to instantly assess the MMO landscape right now, I would say adventuring is emphasized and combat is less emphasized. Like really solid combat is not being given enough attention, I don't think.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go along with that, because I think Thunderleg on the forums had some kind of similar to say, and that's adventure is enhanced by combat, yet adventure sans combat can stand on its own merits. Combat alone, for its own sake, is much like a saltine cracker without the salt. So
that's gross just thinking about.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I like this especially because it's just like a really realistic take on that situation, because like I said, a lot of games miss the mark on a real sense of adventure. I think they may like try to lean towards that, but I think that's one of the biggest things that MMOs tend to fail on is a real sense of adventure, at least modern ones. And so,
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, a lot of times I feel like the MMOs try to bring you back to combat and get you hooked on the combat, so that they can just make everything else try to push you into that or support the combat. But You know, I'll admit I have played a lot of MMOs where the combat was like not so great. But I played it because the adventuring was excellent, you know. So.
Well, let me give you an example of a counterpoint to that. I'm playing Final Fantasy XIV right now. The main story quest in Final Fantasy XIV is almost all adventure and no combat. And I've tuned my brain to be okay with that now for this game, because I know what it is. Like constantly it's talk to someone here, now go talk to someone over there, now go talk to someone over here, now find a thing out in the world that is like 2 feet away from you. Like it's so adventure heavy, and it's not even adventure. I mean, you know, adventure in air quotes, I guess, but there's no combat involved. Like there's no gameplay involved. And that's where it loses me, because I get so frustrated, because I'm like, I don't feel like I'm being asked to challenge myself at all. So if they had just mixed in gameplay into it, and I know that, you know, there are dungeons you have to do along the way, and you have to, you know, use the dungeon finder to do a dungeon to progress. I know there is that aspect to it. But I think that's the perfect example. I think Final Fantasy XIV is the perfect example of where a game is way too heavy on adventure and very light on combat. Now, there's a whole side of it that you can just do the dungeons. You can just be a raider. You don't have to do I guess you don't have to do the main story quest or any of the questing.
Mm-hmm.
However, I don't think it's designed with that as being the primary focus. So, yeah. It stands out in my mind is a perfect representation of this question.
That's true. And I do really think that there has to be a balance, you know, like to choose the middle ground, of course. But I like the idea that each one of them has to like support the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like your combat has to somehow support adventuring. Like you mentioned, you know, you can run from NPC to NPC to NPC. That gets old.
Real quick.
And
real quick.
And if the combat sucks, it's not enhancing the adventuring when they try to put the combat in there. And vice versa. If, you know, you're constantly doing combat with no reason, it can get old really quick because there's nothing to really tie you in. There's no sense of, you know, what's to come, or what was mentioned by with like goals, you know, it's there's combat to combat or whatever, which we have found some people like that, you know. So
well, I mean, I like we talked about grind a couple episodes back. You know, we asked the question, is grinding good? Well, if combat is engaging and, you know, well done and well constructed and purposeful with a goal and point, I mean, then okay, fine. You know, combat can stand on its own if it has those kinds of hooks. But I mean, that's not really the kind of game that that's not really an MMO, you know, like massively multiplayer online role-playing games. You know, there has to be the adventure side of it, or there has to be I don't play Eve, so I'm going to talk a little bit from a, you know, place of little knowledge. But my understanding of Eve is it's not really, there's not much adventure going on. It's more of it's more about the combat. It's more about the economics and the control and that kind of thing. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I can't, because my experience is, you know, fairly limited. I only have maybe 15 hours in Eve, and
right.
To me it did feel very mechanical, I guess. But again, plenty of people are like really need that, and that is sometimes enough, I guess. Like, so I can't discount, you know, that there is an audience for a purely mechanical kind of game, right? It's just I can't find myself committing to something unless there is some sort of like, I don't know, storyline, some sort of like exploration, some kind of sense of I'm growing, or I'm not just growing in like levels, but like I'm, you know, learning about the world. And yeah.
I mean, I grew up on adventure games. I mean, literally grew up on adventure games. You know, I was doing adventures before I was ever doing any kind of combat. You know, like point and click adventures, text parser based adventures. and then that kind of evolved, and you know what it makes me think of is like the AD&D computer games, like the gold box games as they're called, and some of the later ones where it sort of it brought the adventure, and then now it brought in the mechanics. Now it brought in the combat mechanics that were tried and true from D&D, and added it into the adventure. But the adventure never went away. You know, you still had a story, you still had characters and a world and places to go and visit and that kind of thing. So I'll never play a game that isn't purely an adventure, not purely, but doesn't involve an adventure in some way, because I just find that that's what speaks to me, man. But the combat's important too. I mean, I don't want to discount it.
Yeah, of course. And I think the great thing about this question is it really encapsulates why, at least I find a lot of interest in Pantheon, is because of that synergy. Like, they are not pulling any punches when it comes to combat being varied and interesting. And, you know, you call tab target whatever, but, you know, I see it as being extremely engaging just because, you know, we've made the analogy of like chess, right? And that kind of intricacy in combat, but also the tenet of like worlds. We're doing worlds, not just games. And that kind of, those things working together is, I think, what's a big draw about Pantheon.
Yeah, and callback to what we were talking about in the first section about the lore now being back on the website. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You know, now that people can read that backstory and read the world history, now they have a reason to go out and do some of these things. Before, you know, they had a little bit from the races, you know, the story of the races on Terminus, and some of the class, you know, lore that's there. But now we've got this big picture that people can read, and I'm telling you, that's what engages people. That adventure, and you know, it's a reason. Joppa is a master of speaking about this. He speaks about the adventure so passionately and with so much understanding of what it means that I think that's why, you know, people can listen to him talk about this stuff for hours on end, because he feels it and he gets it. So,
you know, this is actually kind of reminding me of I think it was during the stream, the dev stream, but it might actually been somewhere else. But recently, I've seen several instances in like Twitch chats of various content creators talking about Pantheon or YouTube saying, yeah, I got into Pantheon because of the Chris Kane, you know, lore readings. And that's how like I approach trying to tell people about Pantheon, is like starting with that. Which is a total like paradigm shift, really. But I think that this kind of balance is of what like Pantheon is really trying to strike between these two kind of seemingly separate things, is why it's engaging. And I just realized there's probably a really good like Thanos joke there to be made about balance and etc. But
we'll leave that to the people in the comments and the chat to make the Thanos jokes.
Yeah, and I mean, on that note, there's so many responses between Twitter and the forums. So definitely, it's, you know, it's not stale. Go ahead, jump in there, put your thoughts, keep this conversation going. It's just a really fun conversation to have, I think, whether or not you can choose a side or not. So jump on that. And anyway, I think that's going to be it for this week's community discussions. The Pantheon community is full of cool projects, new people, and things that are just worth sharing. What's this over here? Look at that. So let's see what we can find in this week's community spotlight. So how'd I do with the bumper?
This bumper was great. I'm so glad you came through on your promise. It was everything I'd hoped it would be.
Oh, awesome! You say that, and knowing that I put it off until like the last minute.
You said it, not me. You call yourself out. I'm not going to call you out. You can call yourself out though.
Absolutely.
I did message you. I'm like, so what's going on? How's the bumper or something? And you're like, oh yeah, right. And then,
like,
but I know
I committed to that.
Technical difficulties. You were having technical difficulties. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, yeah.
But you really, I see you walking through the snow in this bumper, and then all of a sudden I see a spotlight, and the music, chimes in, and I like it.
It was really fun to make. I'll admit that, and I could see why you guys are addicted to bumpers.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun. But anyway, so this is Community Spotlight. Just separating this out, like I kind of mentioned last week, because I want to have a chance to specifically shine as a segment, in case we maybe swap up community discussions at some point. I pretty much always want to do this kind of a thing because we're Pantheon Plus, but we really are about like shining, light on the rest of the community, right? So,
well, this is a perfect segue actually from what you were just saying about Chris Kane and him reading the lore, bringing people in. These are the people, like these content creators, the community who are creating content and finding their passion with Pantheon. This is going to bring people in. So it's a perfect segue for this.
Yep. And all these people are, them being involved pushes Pantheon forward because it gets other people involved. And, once you kind of jump in on it, it's your family. So
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, let's shine some light on some folks. First up, I feel like this is like every week, but hey, we've got Crowsinger, In the Sway of Storms, chapter 18. It's going to be up on the official forums and Pantheon.plus with the accompanying art, of course.
Awesome.
And I actually especially like the art from this one. It's just a really, really cool scene. But then next we've got RedbeardFlynn. So Redbeard actually released a video recapping or kind of looking out over 2022 as kind of like basically getting himself into trouble by making predictions. But it does go over several MMOs, but Pantheon is included there. So that's my excuse for putting this great guy on the community spotlight.
I love his sense of humor. Just if you watch just one of his videos, like he's so clever and he's got this wit about him that I can watch for days. So yeah, makes great stuff.
Absolutely. And he's got a heart of gold. So, yep. But so actually also on the YouTube side of things, a channel that I hadn't seen before, Huntin for Games, put out a video recapping Pantheon over the last year. So reverse of what I just talked about with Redbeard. Now, I was pretty excited about this one just because they're already a pretty established channel. Yep. He seems to cover Final Fantasy 11 mostly, so that old school crowd, right? But I was surprised by just how great of a recap it was with his own thoughts. It definitely seems like he's really anticipating Pantheon. He's done his research and not just like shallow stuff, right? Like he's actually giving deep thoughts on specific things, and I was just so happy to see that from someone. I mean, like I said, I hadn't heard of before.
Yeah, I knew about this channel. I've watched his videos before, his Final Fantasy 11 videos, and I'm not even a Final Fantasy 11 guy. I really like his style. I like his, it's a very intimate sort of approach to making content. He speaks sort of very directly to you. I really like his style. I think I left a comment on one of his videos one time, sort of saying, hey, if you ever, check out Pantheon or something like that, sort of trying to get him, to take notice a little bit. But I was so glad to see this because I think he does have a big audience with the Final Fantasy 11 crowd. He's certainly one of probably the foremost knowledgeable people on the game that I've seen. So it's great to see him make a video about it.
Yeah, and that crowd is probably extremely apt to be interested in Pantheon, right?
Yeah,
so it just makes
there's
sense.
Some DNA in common there, right?
Yeah. So awesome stuff. Feel free to go check that out because I know you guys have probably seen a lot of recaps already, but it's worth it. He has got some really cool thoughts. So. Also, Bazgrim did another kind of day after watch party of the dev stream, which I guess that's kind of becoming a thing now.
I guess he had fun the first time. I guess it was sort of cool to do it as sort of like a spoiler free, like let's get together if you haven't seen it kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I actually couldn't make it this time just because I was, well, to be honest, I was preparing for this. But I think it's really cool. And it actually works out really well because we can do like Pantheon plus you. There's that recap. there's Baz's recap and the, initial dev stream. There's like plenty of coverage for people to participate and interact with content creators, directly in these shows. It's just really fun. So glad to see that.
Absolutely.
And lastly, so I love doing introductions in here, and I'm going to continue doing them until, we get 20 people every week and I just can't keep up. Right. But there were some new introductions. Unfortunately, this time they weren't in public forums. So I think it's okay for me to say this, but if you have access to the Champion forums, just make sure to go say hi to them, welcome them in. And as usual, I'll have links to all of the linkable things in the show notes here, just to make it easy for everyone to hop on, support, comment, check out the content, etc., etc. But all right. I think that wraps it up for the inaugural Community Spotlight.
Sit back and relax. It's time for The Lore You Know. All right, so The Lore You Know. So they say if you don't know where you've been, you can't know where you're going. In celebration of the foundational lore returning to the official website, we are embarking on a tale of Terminus, my friends. It is time to learn the history of the world, because we're all going to be inhabiting it someday, and we should know about the events that shaped it. So in our lore segment, we are going to begin in the year 23 IH, so 23 years from the start of the current calendar as it is, with the dwarves, the elves, the ogres having only arrived on Terminus a few years prior to that. The dragons have withdrawn from the world, and this is the state of things. So listen along as we enter the Age of Seclusion with the words by J.N. Gerhardt, as read by myself. For over 400 years, this era endured, with each of the three cultures learning to thrive largely reliant upon their own merits. While there is certainly much to say about the ogres, elves, and dwarves in this early hour of their histories, they are not the race that holds center stage in this epoch of Terminus. Aside from a moment with the dwarves that reveals a quandary affecting all races, it is perhaps best to condense these accounts down to one or two notes each. In an acute void of leadership and direction, the ogres reeled in successive defeats during the Third and Fourth Wasche Wars. The elves cultivated the heartseed of their fabled Lucent tree before the foot of the Rones, and bound with magic and spell the first three seals of the eventual seven-locked door. The dwarves fractured from the failed underground kingdom of Amberfate, but the rule of Kadasa itself remained stable under Kaza's noble hand. Yet, all told, the Age of Seclusion was quite secluded, though a universal mystery for each race was the emerging strangeness of their gods' behavior. There seemed an ethereal seclusion, more deeply felt than the physical one. At this time, the first half of a stipulation believed to be enshrined within the Dragon Accord began to show evidence, hereafter called the Celestial Boundary, though it has many names as there are races who've encountered it. During the imprisonment of Rozek, immediately after their arrival, the dwarven godhead of Lockenhammer was able to exchange the immortality of the vile god Razek the Rageful for a lesser power, the High Mortal form, by an ethereal transfiguration known as Dissension. Rozek had sought to finally devour the dwarven race, realizing himself free of the ancient mandate of balance on Uldasa, which forbade him destroy the people created by his noble rival Kazus. Of this liberation he discerned correctly, but the liberation equally applied to Lockenhammer, who took the opportunity to change Rozek's divine form to that of a high mortal as punishment for his crime. As well, Rozek was imprisoned for 1,000 years in the furious winter of the Tenebrous Tundra. Yet Kazus in turn took the chance of dissension upon himself, wanting to rule and abide intimately his dwarves as a high mortal king. This has worked famously, as even the reduced capabilities of these descended gods are such that Kazus still leads his people today over 900 years later. Kazus understood the second half of the Celestial Boundary, namely, the Boundary. When Roknel Thamos brokered the Dragon Accord, he may have feared that his own power might, in some manner, be threatened by the new inhabitants of immortal persuasion. While he may not have been able to forbid they enter his realm, perhaps he bartered for a reduced ability for deities to engage with their devotees. Was this intended to eliminate the chance of a new god gaining enough influence in the mortal realm to threaten significant elements of dragonkind, chiefly Rochnolthamos himself? I consider such, but have no evidence. While accounts suggest this first iteration of the boundary was more relaxed than that of today, engagement by a divine being with a mortal was limited and at times ineffectual. Yet this well-intended barrier would become the doorway through which the Ravaging Lord himself would walk soon enough. And that's the lore you know. So it's going to be a long journey for us because we are going to go through it. And I think my lore reading schedule is now filled up until 2023.
Nonsense. Don't let those giant paragraphs intimidate you.
They are quite extensive, but they are worth it. So we are going to go through them. Yeah, right on. So right on, man. That brings us to the end of episode 85. Desrin, awesome job, as you always do. We should get together again next week and do this. What do you think?
Let me check my schedule. Yep, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't miss a newsletter week. Come on. Well, you got it.
Yeah, it's a newsletter week. So we will have a good recap of the newsletter next week. And thank you, everyone, as always, for hanging out with us today. Remember, we always welcome your comments, your feedback. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this. Check out the links in the description, again, for all the folks we mentioned throughout the course of the show. And with that, have a great week, everyone. And we will see you next time.
Toodaloo.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Pantheon Plus is not affiliated with Visionary Realms. Be sure to check out our Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube channels under the name Pantheon Plus. You can follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and Desrin at DesrinDoes also on Twitter. And you can stay up to date with all things Pantheon at www.pantheon.plus. Until next time, cheers, and thanks for listening.